All right, we're gonna look at mobility first. So this is your anatomy. It's gonna help us understand what you're capable of doing when it comes to your movements, okay? So things that we wanna do has to first, you have to have the ability to do it, right? So we wanna understand, do I have the ability to do the things that, say, the studies show is the best way to move, right? So trunk rotation. These are the elite ranges. You're a little tight there. So what that means is as your hips rotate, you're gonna have a hard time delaying your trunk. Why is that important? Because energy sequences up. It moves up through the hip rotation, through the trunk rotation, through the arm rotation. So the more time between each segment, the more time you have to accelerate energy. That's how we throw harder. You give it less time, you have less time to accelerate energy. So typically it's harder to create that energy at the end, okay? So you're gonna be a little restricted on delaying the trunk, which is a big piece. Hip abduction, that's when the legs go sideways, a little tight. That's gonna affect how long you can build energy before you sequence rotation. So that's why we stride sideways, because we're building energy before we rotate, okay? So you're gonna be a little tight there. So that means you could start rotation early. Your ankle mobility is a little tight. So that's gonna affect that means your lower body strength and how well you're gonna push forces out of the ground. So we have to create the forces out of the ground to push it up through the body to the wall, right? Your internal rotation's pretty tight on your right side. Left and right, so you're pretty tight too in rotation. And this femur is what turns your hip. See how my hip turns when I turn my femur, okay? So when you're tight there, you're gonna have a hard time creating the rotational movements. So we gotta work on that. These are all things that you can work on. Trunk flexion, really tight. Even though we saw your foot slip here, and you got to a place that you were probably forced into, it still could have been lower and farther out, but you're pretty tight in hip flexion to be able to really push your trunk forward. But also this is an active movement. Could be just weak hips, because you look like you got into a decent place. So hip extension, this is gonna affect when you go to get in a full stride and drive your hips open. You have to be able to extend your hip capsule. You're gonna be tight there, so it's gonna affect how well your hips can rotate. So you have two things, the tight femur rotation, tight hip extension, that's gonna make it hard for you to really rotate your hips well, okay? As far as your athleticism, at 170, 30 inches is gonna be good for your weight, which, how old are you?
16.
Yeah, so that's good for your age. But as you age, I want to see your body weight go up, and you either maintain that or get a little better, and that gets elite. Your strength is below average, but your speed's pretty good. Like, you're quick. Your why balance is weak. This is your ability to use the kinetic chain. So I think we do have some weakness in the hips too, and your lower leg that would improve, and your grip strength's weak. So overall, I think you're quick, but you're not strong. We got to get stronger, and that usually is an easy thing to do. So that's not a hard thing to do. It's always hard to be like, you're strong, but you're not quick. That's a lot harder than if you're quick but not strong. Okay. All right, so let's walk through it. So coming out of leg lift. Okay.
Can you see? Yeah.
So out of leg lift here, your lift leg is almost ready to put down, and your shin is still kind of too vertical. We want that shin a little bit more linear, because the back leg's the only leg on the ground. So if we're gonna pump energy through the body, it's gonna come in that connection to the ground. So the leg that's gonna create that energy is a little too vertical, meaning if my shin's too high up, when I go to create force, I'll jump. So what happens is I won't do it, and I'll turn it down. I'll just lay it down. If it was linear and I push, it's not a jump now. Now it's propulsion. It's energy exploding me forward, pushing through my trunk potentially, right? So you can see at front foot strike, there's a little attempt, but more your front leg is pulling it open. So at landing here, cut this off. So at landing here, foot plant, let's see the sequence. So this is foot plant, maximum external rotation, ball release. If we go right to foot plant, which is right here, we can see pelvis rotation is slower than trunk rotation. That's not what we want. Foot plant, we want the trunk still closed off, We want the pelvis rotation peaking the highest. So, like I said, you probably didn't get much of a drive out of that back leg to propel your hips around. And what you did is your front leg just kind of pulled you forward, and now you're already trying to accelerate your upper body. So that's not ideally how you want to push energy to your trunk. The ground gives you so much more ability to create energy, and the back leg is on that ground way longer than the front leg. You want them both, but you didn't really create a lot of energy out of your back leg. That's why because it powers pelvis rotation. That's why your pelvis rotation is so slow at landing, and your trunk rotation is already trying to go ahead of it, okay? So there's a poor sequence between here to here because this back leg didn't create enough energy to push ahead to then transfer up your body, okay? So if we go to maximum external rotation, your pelvis rotation is at maximum external, look, at maximum external rotation, your pelvis rotation is higher than your trunk rotation. It should be the other way around. So what happened is you landed, your trunk rotation was already going ahead, and now at pitch release, your hip rotation's finally coming around. So your hip rotation kind of showed up late, and it should already have shut off at this point. So it's probably more of an understanding that you have a good stable front leg with a late hip. So your front leg stabilized really well, but your hips were late. So they were still accelerating as you're throwing your body. Studies show that that's not good use of energy. Not only is it going to hurt your velocity, but it's also harder on your arm. So that's something over time we really got to get better at getting those hips to open earlier. And then at pitch release, your trunk rotation is way turned off. Yeah, it's like you're running out of energy pretty quick with your trunk. That's probably because you slipped too. That slip could have done that. Let's look at forward trunk. So the last one I really like to look at is forward trunk. That's the trunk flexion going forward. You can see at maximum external rotation, it was pretty much at its peaks, which is good. You just don't see you don't see a lot of forward trunk tilt. So I'm looking at when does the energy peak in your trunk that's going to push the energy of the ball, and then where is it? So if I see a guy, y'all both landed with your trunk here, but it released, this guy's here and you're here, and you both peaked there, and both of your speeds were the same, who pushed more energy to the arm? Would it be the guy that went farther or no?
Yeah.
But why would it be the guy who went farther? So it's like a jet on the runway. If I give a jet a shorter runway, and they're both the same jet, so if there's two jets and I give one a shorter runway, who's gonna have to accelerate quicker to get to the same speed?
One with a shorter runway.
Right. So, but I told you they were accelerating at the same speed, so that means the one with the shorter runway is not gonna get to the same speed. He has potentially less time to get to the same speed. So when you have more distance to travel, you have more time to accelerate. If you have more time to accelerate, you create more energy at the end, right? You create more force. So you never want to be in a short range, right? You don't want to be like in short little movements. You want to be in big movements, using all that time to accelerate. And you can see you're stopping short because your trunk's almost pretty much vertical at release. So you're cutting off more time that you had. Why were you doing that? We knew your hip flexion was tight. You know, it could go to the strength of your hips, of your lower leg. It could also goes to not getting linear and propelling the energy out of your back leg to get that energy out. As far as over here, your spin, it's not too bad. I think there is a little early trunk rotation here. When you land, you pull your glove. Pretty much at front foot strike, your glove is almost fully tucked and chest is open. That's called early trunk rotation. So you're starting this early, and that can cause you to get too rotational at the end. So it can cause you to get too rotational, and what happens is if you're too rotational, you stay on the side of the ball too long. But it's not too bad. It's just your spin efficiency would get a little better, and then your brakes would be harder. So that we don't want to be early trunk rotating because once again, it goes against the sequence. We're trying to get the hips to open. If I'm pulling the glove at landing, then I'm starting the trunk ahead of the hips. And it's probably why your trunk speeds were higher than your hips at landing. So you can't do that. But a lot of times we do that when our legs fail, because we use this to create the energy as opposed to the legs to create the energy. These are all things you're going to learn as you study through the program, but you need to understand, to get this to the principles that I've defined, you've got to just work on the mobility. You've got to improve your mobility, you've got to improve your athleticism, and then as you start to do that, it should be easier to apply the mechanics that you're learning that are the elite mechanics to get the elite velocity.
Cool.